I don't like rules. Don't bother me. Leave me alone. Those are the first words I heard from Jedediah, an 18-year-old boy who was staying at our transitional housing program. Last month, I was attending a conference for the California Coalition for Youth. They asked me to facilitate a group of kids that were going to the Capitol to learn about the legislative process. The theme of the conference was Survivor. The idea is the kids would learn about the legislative process while having a little bit of fun. The morning of the first session, the keynote speaker made a rhetorical question. He asked, "Who wants to be homeless?" Jedediah stood up and said, "I want to be homeless." I knew it was going to be a long conference. The speaker asked another rhetorical question. Jedediah stood up again. Soon he was quietly escorted out of the room. At my tribe after the breakfast, I was talking about the rules to the 15 members of my survivor tribe, and in walks Jedediah announcing he didn't like rules, don't bother me, and I'm not going to participate, and sat down in the middle of the group. Well, I knew the rules of Survivor. I like that show. And I know the idea is to outplay, outwit, and outlast your opponents. And I believe that Jedediah had met his match in me. So of course, I say to Jedediah, "Perfect, you're just the kind of kid I like. Sit down and tell me what rules you want." So of course he had no rules, so I said, "Okay, I'm going to get to know this kid more." Afterwards, I told the kids, try to meet people. The idea to win this game is you go out, collect business cards, talk to people, you meet people. That's the purpose of our Survivor game. Well, Jedediah didn't want to meet anybody, but I was not going to let him be alone. Every moment I had that day and I saw Jedediah sitting alone, I'd sit next to him and just start talking. I'd talk about my family, the weather. He was clearly irritated, but I was ignoring him. And soon I found out what his story was. Jedediah had grown up in the woods of Humboldt County. His parents grew and sold marijuana. He had both parents, but he had no brothers and sisters, no family. He was homeschooled, so he never met anybody. He really grew up with only his parents off the grid, saw nobody. Usually only one parent was there to raise him while the other one was doing jail time. When he turned 18, a few days later, both his parents were arrested for dealing methamphetamine. They were sentenced to prison. He was alone, no job, no money, and no place to stay. He had enough for a bus ticket. He bought a ticket to Los Angeles, packed up his backpack, and headed out. Lucky for Jedediah, he got hungry about San Jose. So he gets off the bus and runs into one of our street outreach workers who directs him to the drop-in center. There he got a meal and a place to stay. But the staff at the drop-in center realized there was something different about Jedediah. He had no social skills. You couldn't talk to him. He was angry all the time. So what do? They decide, let's send him to a conference in Sacramento. I guess they figured I could deal with him. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do at Bill Wilson Center. Every year, we see 10,000 individuals through our 16 programs. We do everything from prevention services to transitional housing. Our homeless drop-in center in downtown San Jose serves over 800 individuals a year, providing meals, medical care, help with employment, and housing. Our runaway shelter in Santa Clara County serves over 400 children ages 11 through 17, and 86% of those kids end up being reunited with their families. I believe those are great outcomes. What about our impacts? Bill Wilson Center consistently beats national averages on our outcomes. And I wonder, why are we so successful? What makes us so successful at Bill Wilson Center? Is it our best practices we use in all our programs? Is it our highly skilled and trained staff? Or is it our no-fail policy, where we try and try until we make sure we can figure out what's right for a young person. I believe it is all these things, but something much more subtle. I believe it is because we make connections with the kids we serve. We are building connections. Let me give you an example of what I mean by building connections. Last year, we expanded our drop-in center to 24 hours. We decided to hire former homeless street youth to staff that program. Before these youth were hired, 33% of the kids would exit street life. After we hired these young people, that number is now 70% of the kids exiting street life going into housing and securing employment. A huge change. And I believe that's because these kids feel connected to us. They feel connected to people like them. But the problem is growing here in San Jose. Some good news about Santa Clara County, though. The numbers of kids in foster care are going down. The number of kids in juvenile hall is also dropping. Great news for our county. But at the same time, the number of homeless kids, it's increasing. We have waiting lists for our transitional housing. Our drop-in center is seeing more and more kids every day. And unfortunately, Bill Wilson Center is also playing the game of survivor. We are being hit with massive cuts from the state, from the county, from the city. In my 28 years, I've never seen such a difficult time when everything is hitting us at once. Our drop-in center could be cut back to only 8 hours a day. I can't imagine cutting beds in our runaway shelter when we're the only program out there. We've got to do something about this. But being the optimistic person I am, I think there's an opportunity there. I think together we can make homeless youth a priority here. I believe together we can assure that kids are safe and are reunited with their families. I think we can provide safe housing for young adults to assure that they make it to independence. This is what we can do together. I believe that we will outplay, outwit, and outlast this recession. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what about Jedediah? Day 2, I guess I'm just really good at these conferences, because they asked me to chaperone the dance that night. Well, I decided I better stay by the punch bowl, because after all, we are dealing with homeless street kids here. Jedediah comes up to me, sits down next to me, first time, and asks if I'll take a picture with him in the photo booth. I made that connection. Jedediah was there with me. Now, the third day, there was 3 kids picked to give speeches on the Capitol steps to legislators. They were going to testify about what it meant to be homeless and on the street. During these speeches, Jedediah is sitting in the corner, busily writing something. While the third speaker is talking, he runs up to me and says, "Can I read my poem, please?" So I'm going, okay. So I walked up to the MC and said, "Hey, Jedediah wants to read this poem. Please let him." So they agreed. Jedediah got up to the podium, leaned over, and read this riveting poem about what life was like being homeless and the tears flowing like a river under the steps of the Capitol. The audience was spellbound. When he was done, they started applauding, and Jedediah had the first smile of the day. I knew that he was now connected to a community. He had found that connection. Now, of course, later in that day, it turns out that my tribe won Survivor at the conference. What else do you expect? After all, I'm not that competitive, right? I gave out the 3 gift cards to the people who met the most, and now it was time to elect the last survivor. Everybody in my tribe got to vote about who had outlasted everyone. And of course, I think you know what the answer is. Jedediah was elected by people who started out not wanting to talk to him. He was now part of our community. He had outlasted me. But I believe Bill Wilson Center and we were the winners, because not only was Jedediah surviving, he is now thriving in our THP program.